Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining, and good afternoon, and welcome to the Celebration of Life for Professor Catharine Wells. For those of you I have not had a chance to meet yet, my name is Odette Eno, and I'm the Marion D. Short Esquire Dean here at Boston College Law School. As I became Dean just this January, I never had the chance to meet Catharine before she passed away last March. And I know from everything I've heard and everything I've read about her that I would have loved to have met her and had a chance to get to know her. It is clear that she deeply impacted her many students, her many friends and colleagues, and the legal community much more broadly. I know she was a beloved professor to hundreds of graduates over her years here, and she was a well-respected, widely admired scholar, and of course a dear family member and friend to many of you. So I'm really so pleased that we can gather here to remember and celebrate her, and to rejoice in the remarkable life that she led and the many lives that she helped to touch. So it's clear to me that she had a really deep impact on the world. And so I'm also delighted to announce that the law school is going to be hosting a 3-year annual lecture in her name, the Catharine Wells Memorial Lecture in Jurisprudence. We're going to start this next year, and the lecture will run annually for 3 years. And this is on the recommendation of some of her friends and colleagues. So I'm happy this is worth them. There are many people who have agreed to share their memories of Catharine with us. And I'd like to begin by welcoming Catharine's niece, Allison Wells Andrews. And I'd like to ask everyone, if you're speaking, to please introduce the person coming after. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm having trouble hearing.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So, well, maybe it's the audio settings.
Yeah, so hopefully that can be adjusted. So some of us speaking can do the professorial lecture to crowds, but maybe I don't want to force that upon everyone. So thank you for joining us, and I'll come back at the end to remind you to please join us for the reception at Barrett House as well. So Allison.
I just feel like being a teacher. Okay. So my name is Allison. I am Catharine's niece. My mother is Kim, who is Catharine's sister. And she wasn't able to be here today because we have someone graduating from Boston College in our family, or from Boston University in our family in May. So my mom's going to come for that. So I am going to read something that my mother wrote in regard to Catharine's growing up. Can people hear me okay? Okay. So this is the story of 2 young girls, Mary Wells and Catharine Wells, who grew up in a house built before the Revolutionary War as a parsonage to the Anglican Church on the hill behind the parsonage. Hence, the place had the name of Church Hill, a part of Norwell, a rural town on the South Shore of Boston. They lived with their parents, Alden and Adelaide Wells. Alden's family lived in various towns in this area when Catharine was a child. In fact, Alden grew up with his family of 6 in a coast town of Scituate, where his father owned a department store called Welch's that was formerly a lumber mill. The town of Scituate is where Catharine is now buried in the cemetery, across from the house in which her father grew up. Her house in Norwell had a white picket fence around the backyard. The 5 acres included an apple orchard, an old barn with an attached 2-holer, animal stalls, and a hayloft. They used it for a Ford and a Buick, in which their father drove to Boston every day to work in an investment firm. He brought home ticker tape for them to use as toilet paper for their dollhouse, which is so adorable. I never knew that. There was a big field near the barn in Norwell, which we used for various sports: softball, badminton, tetherball, basketball, and croquet. The house itself had 6 gables, not 7, painted white with green shutters. The inside stairway curved around, but was not quite as treacherous as those in Catherine's Mill Street house. The Norwell house had a front living room, originally for guests, and a back living room for the family. The back living room had a fireplace with a Dutch oven, which indicated that the back living room had originally been used as the kitchen when it was the parsonage. Upstairs, there was a bathroom and 2 bedrooms with gabled ceilings just right for the doll houses and tea sets. I'm not sure that Catherine was as crazy about dolls as Mary was. Catherine more likely would look out the window in their bedroom and discuss life with her imaginary friends, Mamie and Goo. They had a bookcase in their bedroom loaded with children's books like the Bobbsey Twins, Aesop's Fables, and Peter Rabbit. Catherine's favorite book was Gilbert the Gay Poodle, which sadly is now out of print. Gilbert wore a red baseball hat, walked on 2 legs, frequently drove a convertible into town. Now, this might sound familiar to some of you. In later life, she adored and lived with several poodles, and her Mercedes convertible was very well known by. Catherine and Mary both took the yellow school bus to Norwell Elementary School on a daily basis during the school year. They also took piano lessons from the next door neighbor weekly, attended brownies or Girl Scouts after school. Catherine played the saxophone. Mary played the clarinet for a few years with an emphasis on few. Those were their formal activities, but playing sports or marbles or jacks was more fun. Catherine always loved games, cards, Monopoly, and checkers. She was so good at strategic checkers that the grown-ups were aghast when they watched her play. At Christmas time, when they visited their mother's family in Newton, New Jersey, she actually had an audience who marveled at her genius checker moves. Both of them learned how to ride bikes with Daddy Alden, holding the bike seat until they could catch their balance and pedal on their own. Daddy taught them to break leaves, jump in the piles before burning them on the roadside. He also taught how to mow the grass, shovel the snow. With 5 acres, there was a lot of snow and a lot of grass. With only 1 power lawnmower, Catherine and Mary would argue frequently about who would have to mow the grass. On the hillside, there was a pine forest with pine needles covering the ground. That is where they would build forts by brushing the needles together and to make a wall. Both of them had full cowboy outfits to play in the fort. They wore boots and tin spurs and a leather vest, red felt cowboy hats, Western shirts, and a cap and a pistol, and a holster at their hips. They knew what cowboys did from watching Hopalong Cassidy and the Cisco Kid on the small black and white TV. In the summer, they went to camp, first to day camp, then to overnight when they were older. They attended Camp Daniel Webster on the estate of Daniel Webster in Marshfield, Massachusetts. Twice a day, they would drive to the beach to swim. In the morning, they had instruction, but in the afternoon, it was recreational swim. They could ride the waves and build castles in the sand. Catherine loved the water and became a very good swimmer. In fact, as a teenager, she won first place in the breaststroke competition at a live-away camp in Burlington, Vermont. It's not strange that Catherine built an exercise pool in her Mill Street house, which she sadly never got to swim in. Family life changed as Mary and Catherine became teenagers. Their parents, well educated themselves in the prep school environment, believed Catherine and Mary should attend Abbott Academy, which is now non-existent, and instead incorporated into Phillips Andover because Abbott was in Andover anyway. I went to Abbott sophomore year, but Catherine went as a freshman. Surprisingly, she missed part of freshman year. This is so funny. Missed part of freshman year because of suspension for smoking cigarettes. To be fair, she reported herself on the honor system. Not a bad way to get an extra few weeks at home. And Home had now moved to New York City, where their father works for a brokerage firm. Home was a city apartment contrasted to the country home in Norwell. Catherine never did return to Abbott, but instead attended Brearley a well-known day school in the East River near Gracie Mansion, where the mayor lives. I only saw Catherine on vacations since I attended boarding school at Abbott for 3 years. At Brearley, she made many friends, although Tricia Nixon, who was in her class, was not one of them. Catherine often brought her friends home for lunch since our apartment was around the corner from Brearley. Of course, Tricia's dad, Richard Nixon, gave the speech at Catherine's graduation. Apart from the speech, it was a joyful time as Catherine left, which had been attended by all the women on in the mother side of their family, including maternal grandmother, their mother, an aunt, and a cousin. Catherine was and is will be remembered as a brilliant woman, well-educated in the best of East Coast tradition. One of her cousins, Antoinette, who Catherine frequently visited in Florida, following remembrance to me. What wrote it to my mother, Kim. My most vivid memory is sitting at the opposite end of the dining room table in Norwell in one of my many weekends absenting myself from Pine Manor, which is a college near Wellesley where Tony attended. Tony continues, your dad was at the head of the table, your mom to his right, you to his left with Catherine next to you. Your dad rattling off a series of 2, 3, and 4-digit numbers, while I madly tried to write them down. Before I could even get them written down, Catherine had added them all up in her head and come up with the correct answer. Oh my God, what a brain. So that finishes my story of your childhood. So I'm actually going to have my brother Ross come up with me as well. Okay, so these are my reflections on Catherine being my aunt. So the story I just read, I love reading. The story is about 2 of the bravest women I know. Both of them have a community of friends all around the world, as I'm sure you can see by those who are gathered here on Zoom and those who think of Catherine every day. My Aunt Catherine was brilliant. She was also incredibly generous with her time, money, kindness, and wisdom. Much of what I see as Catherine's wisdom was her ability to listen. There was never an interruption or an attempt to complete your thoughts and finish and jump in with her own opinion, even though we all know she had many of those. My Aunt Kathy was a lawyer. I knew that. Growing up, she was also the aunt who would come visit her sister and family often. She would bring to Colorado my Uncle Sam here. And without mercy, and Uncle Sam would without mercy ensure me and my brothers, Ross and Sean, would endure upside down tickles. Sam would literally pick us up by our ankles and dangle us, head towards the floor, and let our siblings tickle us until our faces were bright red from laughing and fight. For some reason, this was very fun and memorable. Kathy was an aunt who would sit on the couch and let me climb onto her lap. She smoked cigarettes. She was allowed to smoke cigarettes in the house. I don't know why cigarettes are a repeating theme. I had nothing to do with that one, but and I would beg her to blow the smoke out of her nose like a dragon. When Catherine came to visit, I also became witness to endless philosophical, insightful, and brilliant conversations with my dad. Both of them were philosophers. My dad with his undergraduate major in philosophy before medical school, and my Aunt Kathy with her PhD. My dad and she had such a great friendship, and she in fact introduced my mom and dad to one another. When we would visit Kathy in Boston later, it was really cool to see her living in a really sleek, modern apartment building that overlooked the USS Constitution. She was single by this time and was working, doing great things in the AG's office. Later, when she moved to Los Angeles to become one of the first female law professors tenured at USC. We also got to hang out with our cool aunt there. I remember our trip to Disneyland, to Six Flags, and watching the movie Valley Girl. And we watched it as a family, and I remember thinking, do my parents know I'm watching this? Her move to California became especially significant for me because when I interrupted our generational attendance to Wellesley by being waitlisted in the 1990s, Catharine called me and said she thought that Mills College in Oakland, where Catharine's goddaughter Samantha attended and was also a women's college, would be perfect for me. And she was right. It was a perfect fit. Catharine and I, at this time, because she was also in California, began forming our adult relationship. She would fly up from LA to the Bay Area often, staying in her studio apartment in Emeryville. She would pick me up, take me to meals, and we would talk about life. Then before my senior year, she moved back to Boston, which was the place that felt most like home to her. She abandoned me in California and just left. She actually let me live in her studio apartment in Emeryville and visited often. So as life happened, Catharine was always there. Weddings, funerals, graduations, celebrations. She was also there in big moments that were not marked by a day. In around 2013, Catharine called me. I was at work, I answered the phone and she says, Allie, I'm going to a resort in Tucson for spring break. Do you want to come with me? Of course, I'll pay for everything. Now, this was so memorable for me because since my father had died about 5 years ago, or 5 years before, in very tragic circumstances with many after effects and responsibilities, and my older brother Sean became very sick. I was also a mother of a then 6-year-old son. I was working 50 to 60 hours a week, and my husband was working evenings and weekends. Needless to say, I was beyond exhausted. The idea of some days at a resort with my aunt and no one else was one of the most thoughtful and needed things that I didn't ever realize I could have. It became a tradition, and every year we would do this. 1 week of relaxation together every year until COVID hit. Every year I would look forward to it. This time away from life, which can be stressful, and to get to spend time with my beautiful aunt. Over the years, our relationship became much deeper. She generously shared her experience and insights from her own life journey that would help me get through mine. She quickly became one of my best friends. I know that I still had so much to learn about her. I've been going through the boxes in her attic. And it's when I came at Thanksgiving the year before she died, so about 4 months before she died, we had started cleaning out like the old mattress and the old fan and like all these things that just take up room in your attic. And those were okay. I'd ask her, like, can we get rid of this? She's like, yes. And I had the boys with me, so they just took them out to the trash, which, and so she was glad to get rid of those. But when I asked if we could go through the boxes, she said she wasn't ready to do that. And really, I can see why. As I'm going through those boxes, I'm finding an incredible number of letters, correspondence, and cards. She kept everything throughout the years. I also found flyers and correspondence with friends about the 1960s resistance movement. She also has letters of love from boys and men and many friends who are likely present today. I so urgently want to ask her about these experiences and what certain people meant to her. I feel so lucky that we did make that last minute trip to her home for Thanksgiving. She looked great. She said to me, "Allie, I'm so happy. I don't know why, but I just feel really good. I don't think I thought I would live this long. And everything from now on feels like bonus time." And actually, the picture with Lucy, the dog, over there was taken that weekend. She also was incredibly proud of her great nephews, Quinn, who's here, who's my son, and Kieran, who's the son of our older brother, who's graduating from BU in May. And also Ross's two boys, Jack and Edward, who are in Texas following along. She also, as she observed us raising young kids, she would remark, she told me and my brother both, I think she told you this, that she didn't realize how hard it was, how much work it was to raise little kids. And she would always kind of praise us for that, and was just, I guess, amazed by the energy that it took to raise kids. And it felt good to have recognition on occasion. Her bonus time was much too short. If anyone deserved to feel that happiness and carefree bonus time, it was her. When I was having some discussions with the doctor at her bedside, shortly before she died, I asked her whether the treatment plan that he and I had talked about sounded okay. She had been laying next to me silent with her eyes closed, and suddenly remarked, "Let's be honest, are we talking about me dying?" Upfront and honest. Later she said to me, "Allie, everyone dies. I'm not ready to die, but I'm not scared." And every time someone reminded her how loved she was, she said, "I know." And this was proven out in the days to come in the hospital. Although she was unconscious, she had a steady stream of visitors coming to talk to her, tell stories, and thank her. We think she may have still been hearing us, because at perfectly timed moments, she would chuckle or smile. Although not long enough, Catharine lived a life of learning, love, self-discovery, spiritual exploration, generosity, teaching, mentoring. She was a beautiful friend and aunt. My Aunt Kathy loved.
My name is Ross. I am Catharine's nephew. And I don't have notes, but I am really glad to be in a space where people are going to tell stories about Catharine. Sign me up. One of my most vivid memories of Catharine was her driving across the country in a U-Haul truck from Boston to LA. Somehow we managed to meet up in Utah, I think. Anyways, all of the memories that I had of Boston growing up was that it was this really dark, gray place. And that memories of coming out to see my mom's side of the family and Catharine's was, it was challenging. For when I was young, my Adelaide had passed away, and Alden was at the end of his time. And we had moved out to Colorado, our family, and I had sort of assumed it was a chance to be in the sun in these bright, great places, and that Kathy's move to LA was part of that same journey. And I'd go out to LA and get to spend I had some amazing times with her. some of the most formative experiences of my life, come to find out, and reflection came from getting to spend time with her. She took me to a comedy club when I was 13 in LA. When I had, I was a big skateboarder growing up, so she just would say, yeah, go to Venice Beach, hang out and skateboard. And I would do that by myself for hours. Or go to Embarcadero and skateboard when I went to San Francisco. She allowed me to just hop on a train to San Diego at age 15 because I had a friend that was a surfer and I wanted to learn how to surf. She said, yeah, here's a train ticket, just go ahead, you know. I would never do that with my kids, but I'm still so bad. But she also had me watch movies that I think were her sort of way of being like, you're gonna get some perspective on this world that's outside of your little realm. One of them was Roger and Me. If people aren't familiar, it's good, you should check it out. I won't explain it. I wound up going to college in the Midwest. And later when Catherine came to my graduation, I introduced her to my film teacher who was a cinematographer in that movie. And I later became a union organizer in the Midwest and a community organizer, now living in the South. I married a community organizer. And my associations with Boston were pretty much, well, with Boston and LA was sort of gray, murky versus bright and sunny. But it was also growing up with my dad in the 80s. It was Celtics, Lakers. It was good versus evil. It was, and this, what I associated that with when I went to go to LA was that basketball fans in LA were the people that just wanted entertainment. They just wanted to go out and do something fun. But Celtics fans were hardcore. They were like the gritty, working class, whatever kind of people. And basketball is an expression of that hard work. And I kind of bought into this dogma. And I associated my own sort of interest in social justice and all of the work that me and my wife also do with that sort of grit. And then Catherine moved back here and she moved into a dark house. And I would come and visit her, and first the house was like gray and dark and smelled bad and there was ice everywhere. And I'm like, okay, so glad that I could be with Catherine. But the next time I came back, the house was brighter. And 20 years of coming to see her, the house was bright yellow and there were flowers. I got to bring my kids to come and stay with her. And my wife, who needed a reprieve from all of the work, found a companion. And so did we, as she could reflect on our social justice work. But Boston was suddenly this place for me and my family that was bright, filled with a chance for reprieve and joy. And looking back, I think the main thing that Catherine was able to give to me was a life that was able to hold justice and joy in one place.
So we finished up as Catherine as an aunt. The next Erica Mitchell, Catherine's daughter, is going to come up. Hi, everybody.
Know how to write this. This is a really hard thing to write for me. A lot of it touches on, what I said about family too. Very much loved her family. So I'm just gonna read. The only word that comes close to describing her are that she was my world, my best friend, my mom in every sense. She was always thinking of me and I would often ask her why she loved me. She would turn her head and tell me a long list of good things about me. Traveled together. And she was my rock. I was 15 years old when Mom met me. Never been to a museum. And I told her this. So the next weekend, we were having lunch at the Fine Arts Museum in LA. She was always trying to teach me about something. It was that day. Later, she took me to the Louvre so I could see it. She was always doing things like this. Drive to Concord, which is not very far, without her telling me something about the revolutionary history, and she was a wealth of knowledge when it came to sharing her knowledge with me and everyone else. I'd like to share a short story of 22. When I was 22, I decided that I was all grown up. 22. And I just should move to Florida. So I got in my car, I went to Florida. I had a job and a place to live in only 1 week. I went to buy milk at the grocery store and realized that I missed my mom more than anything. And why would I want to leave somebody that I just got? I was home before 3 weeks were up in Florida. I didn't leave home for many, many, many years. And over the years, our house was a home. Me and Mom really prided ourselves in making that. For people to come, stay, feel free to be who they were, and to stay home for as many years as they wanted or needed. You know, when you found your other half that can unconditionally love you and love them. My mother and I chose each other. And our higher powers made it possible. We spent many hours laughing, talking, crying, and sometimes disagreeing, and never with conflict. When my mom first met me, she didn't know that I was dyslexic by the way I talk. But I couldn't read and I couldn't write. And I hid it. Mom found out. Of course. So she tried to help me. She learned how to teach me how to read and write, and it fell over onto her students too. She was always telling me about a student that had a problem with dyslexia or something that she wanted to run by me or think of outside the box. So, one trait, one of the best traits, is something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. and her wonderful ability to find a fountain soda, no matter what country, state, town, or province we were in. She had to have her ice and Diet Coke. She wasn't the typical mom who baked cookies after school. But she was always a great mean takeout woman. Or a dinner or lunch. She lived her life as a spirit of a teenager. One of her next adventures was to go to Morocco and ride a camel that she saw in a movie, her favorite movie, Lawrence of Arabia. I'm grateful that I will be buried next to my mom. So one day can live eternity with my mother and the person that I love the most in my life. I believe this world is not a good place without her in it. And next will be Gail Starr, her best friend.
Hey, I wish I had known about Cisco Kid. Because when I was about that tall, he kissed me on the cheek. That would have been a good thing to share. Anyway, I've titled this Friends for 50 Years, or Why I Never Had to Go to Law School or Watch Talking Heads on TV. I became Kathy's friend when we moved into an apartment in Berkeley, below Sam, Kathy, and their roommate, Ben. I could hear the rapid clip, clip, clip of her footsteps overhead and her large, energetic laugh. She had many friends. So we joined upstairs gatherings to watch Glenda Jackson as Elizabeth I and the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Until then, I thought watching TV was a very strange pastime for adults. So anyway, I got corrected on that. Anyway, soon I was about to learn a new abbreviation, ABT. Who knows what ABT stands for? I guess we didn't go to that school. It means all but thesis. Okay, that was a new initial set for me. There were many rewrites in philosophy graduate school. One day, Kathy came in saying that she had helped a friend fill out a legal document and how satisfying that was. It was just one and done, not like the endless rewrites of her thesis. At that point, Kathy decided to apply to law school and took the LSAT. Her score was 797 out of 800. She thought she might have done well because she finished early and had time to check over kind of a complicated chart. Still, 797, folks. When it came to her interview at Harvard, the interviewer mentioned that, that Harvard wished they could admit more women, but it was just so very difficult to find qualified applicants. Kathy thought, well, I do have a straight A average and a net 797 on the LSAT. Then she said, yes, I completely understand how difficult it must be to find qualified women. As Sam and Kathy left for Boston, I resolved to never make friends with a student again. They just left. Time passed, and rumor has it the UC Berkeley administration noticed that 0 philosophy PhDs had been awarded during the prior 4.5 years. Go figure. They reached out to the philosophy ABT people. And the next I knew, here came my friend back to Berkeley to rewrite.
Yeah.
By that time, my children could walk, talk, and dress themselves. I really waited for them to dress themselves. I thought that was going to be hot stuff. From then forward, we had many hibachi hamburgers, watched all of the courtroom dramas on TV, and my children learned law at Catherine's knee and argued philosophy forever. I kind of read a book or looked at the flowers or stuff, anyway. You can tell my paper is graph paper, not a legal pen. Not a legal person. Anyway, for 50 years, Kathy and I were friends. For 50 years, we shared the worst moments of our life and the best. She was a second mother to my children, always there, always reliable to give them counsel, wise counsel. And they listened. For myself, at age 72, I became less busy. All of a sudden, I got smacked in the face with the horrible state of the world. Shortcut to get caught up was to call Kathy and have her explain the nuances. I'm proud to say that she first heard about the push to exercise the Article 5 clause from me. Okay, she hadn't heard it from any of her legal colleagues. And she didn't believe me until she went to check. And then she came back and she said, "You were right." Yes, I know I was right. Thank you. Anyway. Okay, so then we also, that gives you a flavor of what went before. So, but we also shared what I consider the more normal parts of life. Kathy was among the very few friends to meet my family in the Adirondack foothills. Her trip there started with an early episode of a driving while Catherine moment. We know what those driving with Catherine moments were like. Anyway, she made it. While in the North Country, we all went to my parents' hunting camp in the middle of Tug Hill. Mother, Tim, Samantha, their little dog Tip, and I went even further back in the woods to fish on one of their beaver dams. Tim and Kathy rode out in our little inflatable raft. When the little beagle swimming around the raft, with the little beagle swinging around the raft and climbing on the beaver house, you can bet that all of the trout were in hiding. 0 nibbles possible. Soon it began to rain. Mother and I sat under a tree, Kathy and the kids under the overturned raft. Mother sat gauging the rain while little Tippy, and then when little Tippy cautiously poked his nose to join them under the raft, my mother considered the dog and declared, "It's time to go now." We were all soaked, of course, and I have the photos. The overturned raft, the hat, the bedraggled bodies. Anyway, that's the normal part of life that I shared with Kathy. So I have a final thought and a challenge to all of you who are in the legal profession. 3 of the 4 books Catherine was planning to write will remain unwritten. The 4th, her torts book, is done. She told me that it practically wrote itself in about 2 months. Of the remaining 3, we would most wish to see her book concerning microaggressions. Let's carry on. So thank you for your time. For 50 years, we shared the worst and the best. We survived with each other's help, and the love remains. And the next speaker is Carolyn Kelleher.
And that's me. Hello? Hello? Oh, good. My name is Carolyn Kelleher, and I'm an attorney in Hingham, Massachusetts. It's wonderful hearing Catherine called Kathy again, because that's how I met her too. We have both recently graduated from law school and joined the office of the Massachusetts Attorney General. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We joined as Assistant Attorneys General. Our immediate boss was Paula Gold. The office was exciting, and our division, Consumer Protection, which is part of the Public Protection Bureau, was populated with many young Assistant Attorneys General. And I sometimes think back on it as the Children's Crusade. Catherine was a loyal and enjoyable friend, and brilliant as well. And she went on to be in charge of her own division, Public Charities. Catherine and I remained good friends from that point on until the end of Catherine's life. We did many things together and were important parts of each other's lives. Catherine babysat for my son when I had to go out of state. I knew her when she pursued her PhD and celebrated her success with her. I shared her joy regarding Erica. I visited her in California while she was teaching at USC. I remember one particularly enjoyable trip that we took from LA to Death Valley, listening to the Traveling Wilburys all the way. When Catherine returned east to teach at BC, she felt she was really coming home. To my mind, Catherine was essentially a New England girl, having been born and grown up in Norwell. And when Allison was telling the memories of Mary regarding their growing up years in Norwell, I remember one of my favorite stories that Catherine told. When they were kids, her mother wanted to surprise her with a cake that was similar to what they had in Alice in Wonderland. And it was going to say on it, "Happy Unbirthday." But when her mother brought it home, instead, the baker had written, "Unhappy Birthday." And that was always one of my favorite stories. I used to send her a happy unbirthday card periodically. Catherine loved to walk around Norwell and remember her early years. We'd walk by the house and see that. We'd walk by the church. Catherine talked about retiring to Scituate, and I understand that Scituate is her final resting place. Catherine was a wonderful friend. I miss her and will continue to miss her, but I treasure the friendship we had. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to talk a little bit about Catherine's lawyering skills. Many of you probably know Catherine was incredibly intelligent and at the same time incredibly kind and generous. My first opportunity to observe Catherine in her practice skills was when she argued a case before the First Circuit Court of Appeals pro se. Usually when a litigant was pro se, the judges on the First Circuit would start out gently, asking a few questions to point out potential weaknesses in the case. And they started that way in this case, except very quickly they realized that Catherine was not only their equal, but actually probably much smarter than they were. And they started to throw every curveball, fastball, and changeup at her to see whether they could catch her on parts of her argument. Every one of them she hit out of the park. And afterwards, one of the judges commented to me, "That was the best oral argument I've seen this year." Some of my students who are here may recall we read her case. It's in all of the major tax case books. She argued the case with her husband at that time, and the case is under the name Hanses v. Commissioner. And it is a landmark decision. Really incredible. A few years later, I encountered Catherine when she was chief of the Public Charities Division of the AG's office. And there was a case that involved a charity that was destined or really well down the path to becoming another Bleak House. And we were summoned to a meeting at her office. Actually, it was in a conference room in the AG's office. And I was sitting there as a young associate looking at all of the best lawyers in Boston. James St. Clair of Watergate fame was there. Ed Hannafy, who had represented Ted Kennedy in Chappaquiddick, was there. Every major litigator in the city was there, and Catherine had summoned all of them to try to hammer out a settlement of the case before we totally depleted all the assets of the charity. Everybody was sitting there with anticipation. Catherine marched into the room and started to talk to each of the lawyers present about the strengths and the weaknesses of their case. I had never seen Ed Hannafy, who again represented Ted Kennedy in Chappaquiddick, speechless. And by the end of the meeting, she had hammered out a settlement with all of the lawyers present. And people walked out of the room not realizing they had been run over by a bus. It was truly remarkable. Fast forward a few years later, Catherine and I were colleagues here at Boston College Law School. Some of you may not realize that Catherine was also, in addition to being a great litigator and lawyer, she was also a closet tax lawyer. She would only admit it among close friends, but she had been on the IRS Commissioner's Advisory Committee on Tax Exempt Organizations, which is the commission that dealt with public charities that are tax exempt. So she was actually an excellent tax lawyer. And she would often wander into my office to discuss aspects of tax policy, and then inevitably it would lead to pragmatism and also discussions of critical theory. And through this all, I would often sit there thinking, I probably have an IQ about 50 points lower than Catherine. Why is she coming in here to talk to me about all of this? And consistent with that, Catherine liked to call me, when she would get exasperated with me, BD, after the Doonesbury character in the comics. I had played football in college, so she thought it was appropriate that she would occasionally refer to me as BD. And she would usually do that when she had presented an argument that I disagreed with. And she would present her counter argument, and then in only the way that Catherine could, she would tilt her head and say, well, Jim, what do you think about that counter argument? And I would sit there speechless, but nevertheless, I would try to rise to the bait, even though I knew that I was going to get hammered in my next counter approach to try to convince her that she was wrong. I miss those days greatly. I miss Catherine. She was such a wonderful colleague, and we were so blessed to have her here. The next speaker is Paula Gold, if she's here.
Hey.
So I will turn it over to Paula, who is the Attorney General in charge of the office.
Are you leaving or something?
No.
Oh.
Okay, hi, this is Paula Gold, and I met Catherine many years ago. I met her when I was a legal service lawyer, and I taught a seminar at Harvard Law School in the lawyering process. And she was in that seminar. And subsequent to that, I became Assistant Attorney General, and Catherine came to work in the Consumer Protection Division, which I headed at that time. She was truly a wonderful person and a wonderful lawyer. And then she became chief of the Public Charities Division, which was one of the divisions in the Public Protection Bureau. And this past marathon day, I thought particularly of Catherine, because when she was chief of the division is when the Boston Athletic Association wanted to start paying money to the winners. And that was somewhat controversial at that time. And I do remember that Kathy and I were involved in that, and Kathy as the chief of the division, and it all worked. There were counter arguments in terms of it should not, money, but to have it be a world-class marathon and to have elite runners, you need to have prize money. At the same time, they kept, and in looking at it now, the ability for non-elite runners to run representing charities. And so part of where we were, what happened in terms of the marathon is because of the decision that was made. And in any event, there were many, I enjoyed working with her. I enjoyed her as my friend. And I certainly miss her. And I must say that when she moved back from California and started teaching at Boston College Law School, I was particularly happy, not just because she moved back from California, because I graduated from Boston College Law School. And I think that she has been a wonderful teacher and she's been a wonderful friend. Do I have to say the next person? For some reason, I'm missing the next person's name.
Hello, I'm Frank Herman from the faculty, and a pleasure to recollect about Catherine, whom I knew well here and whose presence I so much enjoyed. We would periodically get together to go to lunch to review the state of everything. And we always went to the same place, which is a little restaurant down on Walnut Street nearby called Aji's, A-J-I, and a Japanese restaurant. And at the time we would go, it would be a quiet, peaceful place. And over sashimi samplers and sushi rolls, we would review the state of the world at our leisure. Maybe it was the restaurant's peaceful, quiet atmosphere that often turned our conversation toward what we might call spiritual or philosophical thinkers. Catherine, of course, knew infinitely more about these people than I did, but I tried to keep up with the conversation. So the names of Emerson, Thoreau, Charles Peirce, Emily Dickinson would come up as still another piece of sushi roll slipped from the grasp of my chopsticks. We thought it would be interesting to form a summer reading group to discuss William James's Varieties of Religious Experience, a study in human nature, where Catherine had such great insights. But sadly, we never got together to do that, but it was fun to think about it. Catherine, it was clear, had a New England transcendentalist mind with a pragmatist spirit, fortified and deepened by a Zen sensibility from the East, a marvelous blending. What strikes me most about when I recall those lunches was not really the substance of our conversations, so much as Catherine's very presence in the moment. She was so there for you. Her warm smile, which we see so beautifully exhibited here, her eagerness to listen, which others have mentioned, just her thoughtful perspective on life, her openness and freedom of thought, which again has been brought up several times here. I want to call it all her composure. No wonder Catherine was drawn to Buddhist wisdom. It fit her so naturally. Buddhism tells us there are 4 divine abidings. Just to list them is to feel the spirit and presence of Catherine again. These are the abidings. Loving kindness. That is an active will to do good towards others. Compassion. That is identifying the suffering of others as one's own. I think we've heard that too. An appreciative, sympathetic joy. A feeling of joy because others are happy, whether or not you had anything to do with it. And equanimity, even-mindedness and serenity. I feel these elements, just to hear them, sum up who our friend was. Thank you, Catherine, for opening yourself to those divine abidings and for making them present among us, for giving them to us. May your spirit continue to dwell in us and in our school. Well, our next speaker, I'm happy to say, is Professor Frank Garcia.
For everyone that has spoken already, it's such a privilege to be with Catherine and in memories of her family and her friends again. I'm here to talk about Catherine and Holmes. You may know this is the book. The title of the book, in case you don't know, is Oliver Wendell Holmes, A Willing Servant to an Unknown God. I love that title, and she really loved that title. In fact, she had to go several rounds with her publisher to keep it. Cambridge wanted something much more pedestrian and searchable. I remember vividly Kim and I discussing this in her backyard over sushi from Haji, of course. I'm so glad that she won that battle. You and I were fortunate to have many conversations with Catherine about Holmes. She truly loved this project. For Catherine, there was something deeply challenging and very interesting, and I think ultimately heroic, about trying to recover aspects of Holmes' life that had been buried or obscured by time and criticism. When asked in an interview in the SCOTUS blog why she had decided to write the book, she said, "What compelled me to write about Holmes was the feeling that, despite all that had been written, no one had gotten it quite right." And I love that phrase. It sounds like so much like Catherine. As I think about it now, it seems to me that in working to understand the many elements that went into a person as complex as Holmes, she had also found a worthy foil through which to understand herself. And so this book is also a set of windows into Catherine's life and character. Whether she's writing about Holmes's pragmatism, his spiritual life, his deep sense of moral purpose, his respect for law and the work of law in the world, or his strong and careful and stubbornly independent mind, she could equally well be writing about herself. I want to let Catherine's words tell the story. In her intro, she writes, "What then is Holmes' story, and why have so many found it compelling? To tell Holmes' story is not an easy task. Amidst all the controversy, it is hard to find the man of flesh and blood, whose real life became the repository for so much ambivalence. Holmes was a private person. Like many New Englanders, he was reticent to speak about what was most personal to him. He would occasionally and somewhat coyly hint at it. Sometimes we can hear it when he talks about the Civil War. Hence, we have The Soldier's Faith and other intensely personal speeches. But the heart of his philosophy,
the part that involved great questions of right and wrong and the relations of man to God, remained unexpressed. Thus, we cannot understand Holmes simply by reading his words. To understand the words, we must try to understand the man who spoke them. What she found as she got to know that man is, sorry, I lost my place here. What she found as she got to know this man better, and I would say got to know herself better through his life, was a particular blend of agnosticism and mysticism, Emersonian transcendentalism and pragmatism, Puritanism and Buddhism that was very New England and very Catharine. She says about Holmes, the depth of Holmes's agnosticism cannot be overstated. But even extreme agnosticism does not equate to atheism. Atheists believe that nothing exists except the physical universe. They therefore view religion as a cultural expression based on a reassuring fiction. An agnostic, on the other hand, believes that there is something beyond the material world, something that remains unknown and undefined. For some, this means that they view theology as little more than idle speculation. For others, theology is more metaphorical, giving expression to feelings that they could not otherwise articulate. Holmes was in the second camp. He maintained a lifelong interest in religious questions. Indeed, the subject fascinated him, although his enthusiasm would quickly wane in the presence of rigid doctrine. Like many skeptics, he was an almost religious man, a man of faith whose deep spiritual impulses resisted articulation and particularity. Thus, the essence of his agnosticism was belief in a creative spirit whose presence he felt, but whose character remained beyond his comprehension. Oh, the whole corpus of work on Holmes, it's enormous, but I would guess that there aren't too many biographers writing that kind of paragraph about Holmes. And it says a lot about Catharine and the way she approached him and the way she approached her life. I think it would take a scholar as philosophical and spiritual and skeptical and idealist as Catharine to uncover these aspects of Holmes. And through this, give us a window into her own deepest self, her faith, her philosophy, her deep moral purpose when it came to law. I feel so grateful to have been given a gift of knowing Catharine, and that through this book, this gift will continue to be available to others. Followed by Professor Katie Young, who's the Associate Dean for Faculty and Global Programs.
So I'm going to speak about Catharine as feminist. Catharine was believed fervently in justice, but she wouldn't put it that way. She would describe her belief as one that was fervently challenging injustice, and especially the injustices that are created on the basis of race or gender. She would put it that way because she distrusted abstractions like justice and grand statements. Her pragmatism informed her feminism, and her feminism informed her pragmatism. Today's feminists often acknowledge their situatedness. The privilege of the white, middle-class, heterosexual, cisgendered woman, for instance, has to be owned, and the blind spots that have been created in past feminist legal theories have to be acknowledged. Catharine's feminism, I like to think, pioneered this type of thinking, or was part of a movement of feminists trying to pioneer this thinking. She was constantly self-conscious in her feminism and was deeply empathetic. She was also deeply skeptical and critical and extraordinarily knowledgeable. She wrote seminal articles on situated decision-making some 3 decades ago. She also wrote seminal articles on microaggressions. She described the hearings of Clarence Thomas and the treatment of Anita Hill with deep insight and foresight as they continue to overshadow American constitutional law, most lately, of course, with the Dobbs decision. Her written work has been central to many feminist case books and to others in the scholarly field of feminism. She has taught generations of law students feminist jurisprudence. And when she asked me to consider taking over the course, I thought of it as the highest compliment. It took me a while to accept. I published a book comparing gender equality protections in constitutions around the world. I saw the global implications and the humanist implications of the subject. But it took me a while to say yes. I've come to see, though, as Catharine always did, how close to home as well as global questions of feminist legal theory are. And after I took on the course, the Me Too movement happened, the Trump election and campaign happened. Now Dobbs has been decided in through a series of cases along similar lines. And I've come to see Catharine was right in asking me to take on this course, and I appreciate that she did so. So generations of law students have benefited from Catharine's feminism, and so too has generations of law teachers. I count myself as one of them, and generations of scholars as well. Thank you, Catharine. Next, after me comes Professor Kim Garcia talking about Catharine and poetry.
No,
Not really.
no, not really. It's better. Better? I paper this way, even better maybe. When I was putting together my thoughts for this, which was difficult, as I know it's been for many of us, I started to ask myself, did Catharine love poetry? She always made me feel that she did. Met every other Wednesdays at Aji's and talked about philosophy and law and poetry. And she had such a lively, empathetic mind. She could experience the enthusiasms of others as her own. She built my own pleasure in what I was doing. She also had this natural sense of the dignity of others. Her ethical stances and study of the law seemed to me to extend elegantly from this. She was discerning. She loved so many of the right things, I thought. Tomatoes, a daughter, justice, friendship. I was willing to defend them practically and consistently. The only place Catharine and I seriously disagreed was driving. She loved to drive fast and into the scrum of truly nasty traffic, and I preferred to live. I was inspired by her engagement in things, not just classes and meetings and dinners. And there were so many fantastic dinners from the very first time we arrived, and where I think the name Sacred Frank and Profane Frank was, I think it emerged at that first dinner, just to keep the Franks apart in a very good way. She would say things like the way she would, in her own words, buy back her time and take trips to Cuba, to Tibet, or decide she wanted to teach undergraduate philosophy and just up and do it. She curated her life towards increasing her own delight and towards the needs of others. She made commitments to people and carried them through, but she also revisioned her life around wonder and new experiences regularly with great energy and courage, especially for someone dogged by serious health issues. Life was never wasted on her. When she got sick this last time, it was serious, as it had been serious so many times before. How many times had her heart been restarted? I'd stopped being shocked. Her heart seemed unstoppable. When I saw her in the hospital, she was not herself. I got her a Coke with an extra cup of ice, her favorite combination, as we all know. But she didn't want much. After talking in a desultory way, which I took to be the hospital drugs acting on her, she said in that straightforward, other focused way she had, I don't want to be rude, but I think you better go. I'm just so tired. We agreed we'd check in again after her family arrived and she felt better. Of course, that didn't happen. Frank and I got the call from Vlad and Katie at her bedside when we were on our way to Iceland, not long after. Vlad held the phone up to her ear so we could say our last goodbyes, which felt unreal and inadequate, but essential to try anyway, and failed to express everything we felt. I would say I miss her every day, but it's not quite true. My brain tries to blur her absence. What happened in COVID retains its strange out of timeness. When I go by her house and remember, I will never cross that threshold and hear the dogs and hug her. I feel the knocked sideways grief of a loss afresh. I register her absence in the world as a thinning of my inner life that increases over time. I won't be talking to Catherine about whatever it is that I'm doing, hearing her good sense and humor, and that loss makes what I'm doing less rich. I miss her deeply. I'd like to end with a poem that I think Catherine would like. It's a selection from Rumi's The Great Wagon. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin working. Take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. The soul lies down in that grass. The world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. Breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the doorsill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. Thank you. And the next speakers will be Ty and Sam from the class of 2016 and 2014.
Hi. I loved my time at BC Law. But I didn't love it because it was an easy academic ride. Spoiler alert, I did not graduate at the top of my class. I did not love it because of the social landscape to traverse. In fact, I was one of approximately 7 Black students in the class of 2016. And I started here the fall after Trayvon Martin was murdered. I'd come here off the heels of a civil rights tour where I was the summer journey leader for a group of Black and Jewish high school students from the DC area, where we went on a civil rights tour that loosely followed the Freedom Rides. And it was an incredible journey up until the Zimmerman verdict was handed down. And I had to have very tough discussions with young people who saw themselves in Trayvon Martin. And so needless to say, when I entered the doors here, I came in as a ferocious lion who was ready to use the law as a tool to advance, causes that were important to me. One of my professors warned me that a lot of students came in as ferocious lions and then quickly became lapdogs. And I said, well, that will not be me. And slowly but surely, with the deaths of a lot of other folks, Black men in particular, that were high profile at the time, my light began to dim a little. It was Eric Garner first, then it was John Crawford III, then it was Michael Brown, Akai Gurley, and Tamir Rice, the youngest of them all. It felt for me like the 2020 before 2020. It felt like a constant barrage of terrible news coverage. And it was hard for me to reconcile getting my legal degree, right? And being in classes in doctrinal classes, no less, where there didn't seem like there was a whole lot of room to contextualize cases, to talk about the racial underpinnings of the law. And yet I remember sitting down directly across the hall here in East Wing, and this really incredible woman walked in with a cup of soda about this large that she placed down in a big gulp cup. And I was like, that's interesting. I wonder who this woman is. And we were learning torts. And quickly I came to think, it was a false belief, that it was going to be one of the easier classes. Because it seems so digestible. Like, okay, I can understand this. I understand these issues in a way that I don't understand a lot of issues in the other classes. And boy, was I mistaken. She made us question everything, including what reasonableness was, which seemed like a very straightforward concept. Like, of course, something's reasonable and something's unreasonable in this case. She was one of those professors that was willing to grapple with the morality of the law. She was willing to contextualize the cases that we were examining within the historical context in which they lie. She not only heard the dog whistles that some people would blow in class, but she would address them head on. It took the burden off of my shoulders and a lot of other students like mine, because there were so few of us sometimes who felt like we had to speak up, and we didn't have to in her class. She made it easy for us to just be students primarily before anything else. And I wish I could say that I've had the luxury of doing that over the course of my life, but that had not been the case. Having her as a professor was incredibly refreshing. Her level of critical consciousness was one that I've never really seen in anyone else before, and certainly not afterward. One of my favorite works of literature is Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, where Dr. King expressed his grave disappointment with the white moderate. He was wholly disappointed with those who were more concerned with and devoted to order than to justice. With those who would say, I agree with you in the goal that you seek, but can't agree with you in your methods of direct action. Those who paternalistically felt that they could set a timetable on another man's liberation. And finally, Dr. King, and this is one of the things from that letter that really has always resonated with me, he expressed that it is a shallow understanding for people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding for people of ill will. And boy, was I lucky that Professor Wells' understanding of the issues that so many of us face in this world and in this country was far from shallow. She had a very deep understanding of the ways in which we live, and how one person's liberation is so closely tied to the next. And she used her very incredible, brilliant mind to do good work. And she encouraged all of her students to do that.
I remember when I told her that I was not going to even put my hat in the ring for OCI, for on-campus interviewing, because I had no interest in going to Big Law. I refused to be a lap dog. And I told her that I was going to do work as an affordable housing and community development attorney. She was pumped. Not only was she pumped, she set me down and she reminded me of how hard I'd worked to get here, how much I earned my keep here as a contributor to this community. And she reminded me that I didn't have to stop there, that my first job certainly was not going to be my last job, and that I had my entire career to do good work. And that is what I am seeking to do. And I'm just devastated that our community did not have a longer time with her. And I sent all of my love to her family, to her friends, to her best friend in particular, to all of you here. And I'm glad that we're able to come here and just share a little of her light. So thank you. Next up is Sam Jockel from class of 2014.
Hi, my name is Sam Jockel. I'm a graduate of Boston College Law School, class of 2014. Thank you, Ingrid, for inviting me here to speak about my professor and my friend. For 2 semesters, I sat to Professor Wells' left in a small seminar class, and I came today like I used to come to her classes well prepared. I read her writings on microaggressions. I read the letter of recommendation that she sent to me after when I was looking for a job. I read her reflection papers and her cursive that I could never understand, so I always have to go and ask her. And all of my writings in print that she dictated to me were still there. So I came up with an excerpt that I wanted to share from one of her writings, and it was from a piece she wrote in July 2020 for the BC Law magazine. This was in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement in the middle of COVID-19. Quote, white people must become racially conscious. We must examine our own privilege and its source in the pain of others. There is, of course, a need for legal reform, but the real work is personal. We must become attentive to the people around us. We must continually consider whether they pay a price for our convenience and peace of mind. I first met Professor Wells in a class called Advanced Topics in Civil Rights Microaggressions. By the mere use of the term microaggressions in the course title, even before classes began, Professor Wells ignited much discussion among 2 and 3Ls. What are microaggressions? What does the law have anything to do with microaggressions? And why is there an entire course devoted to it? Of all of the courses on my transcript, that course has been most frequently asked about by employers since graduating. And I think that was Professor Wells's goal all along. Between that course and a course I took with her on American legal theory, Professor Wells introduced me to legal scholars writing about intersectionality, critical race theory, legal pragmatism. From Carl Llewellyn to Kimberly Crenshaw to Catherine McKinnon, these were legal theorists that many law school graduates didn't have the privilege of studying, unless, of course, they were one of Professor Wells's followers, as I was. Despite the theoretical nature of her upper level courses, the undercurrent of her teachings was that while law can be a powerful tool for change and justice, real change begins at home. Much of the focus of her classes in the way that I understood she lived her life was an emphasis on the importance of taking the time to learn from those experiences whose experience is different than your own. In 2012, I was the co-chair of BC Law Lambda, which is BC Law School's LGBTQ+ student organization. During my tenure, I was alerted one day by some of our members that the Lambda office was vandalized with graffiti all over the walls. I remember running to that office and being shocked that someone would do this to our safe space. By that time, I had developed a close relationship with Professor Wells outside of the classroom, and my instinct was to march straight to her office to discuss what had happened. In response to the vandalism, she encouraged me to stay strong and to not lead with fear. My relationship with her had changed following that conversation. I saw her not just as my professor, not just as a legal scholar or a philosopher, but as my friend. Someone who was there for me in a time when I desperately needed it. I ended up mobilizing a law school-wide effort to come together in response to that vandalism, to show the perpetrator that our community was strong and resilient. I owe much of my development as a student, now as a lawyer and a person, to Professor Wells. I wanted to conclude with how Professor Wells finished her call to action that I read earlier. I think there are 4 questions we should ask ourselves every day. Do I invite honest responses? Am I willing to listen with an open heart? Am I willing to take responsibility for my role in perpetrating an oppressive system? And am I willing to change? Thank you. Catherine as advocate, Jay Lee, class of 2023, and Rebecca Gao, class of 2024.
Hi, my name is Jayon Lee, and I am a member of the class of 2023. I just want to share 2 quick stories of what Professor Wells meant to me and why I'm grateful for her. Before I read a note from a member of the class of 2010. First, and as my classmates can probably attest, we were all members of her COVID year Zoom class. And we kind of had a bit of a Pavlov's dog training in that class because in law school, we don't have bells to signal the start and end of class, but Professor Wells' class, fourth class, would always begin with the crack of a soda can. And her already getting it up, we'd all just kind of perk up when the class was starting. And to this day, when I hear that soda crack, wherever I am, I'm like a little perked up, a little more alert. So I'm thankful for that. And secondly, Professor Wells, in 1L year, I think law school is really tough, and we're figuring a lot of things out, and a lot of times we forget why we're here. And we're learning about Civ Pro, Rule 12b-6, property. None of us own property. It's just so irrelevant. What am I doing here? Did I make a mistake? And in towards class, Professor Wells, one day we're reading a case about a barrel of flour falling on somebody, injuring them. And again, we're just like, this is so irrelevant. Barrels of flour would not fall out windows. But then Professor Wells took a moment to pause and tell us this is why she loves torts. She was saying how torts is a way to create the society that we want to live in. And I realized, yeah, I don't have to worry about barrels of flour falling on me because of this case. And also it reminded me of why I'm in law school, to create a society that we want to live in. And so I really appreciate Professor Wells for reminding us of that 1L year. Professor Wells' legacy and impact also stems back to the class of 2010. Beth Williams was a member of that class, and she has written a note about Professor Wells' impact, and I'll be reading her note. I arrived at Boston College Law School at the end of the summer of 2007, fresh off a stint in Austin, Texas, after having lived all my life in the conservative, sheltered environment of Northwest Arkansas. I knew nothing practical about law school or 1L, and very little about life and where I wanted mine to go. I was also weird, and coming from the South, the culture of New England made me feel even stranger. Luckily for me, a few professors at Boston College Law School had a habit of adopting those of us who were slightly strange and unmoored among the incoming class. One of those professors was Catharine Wells. I remember feeling a little nervous when I walked into 1L torts, having heard that Catharine was tough. As the semester went on and I became friends with Catharine, I discovered she had high expectations for her students and wanted to see us succeed. She also had a brilliant mind, was an excellent teacher, an advocate, and shared her knowledge and wisdom freely. At the end of the semester, Catharine asked me to be her teaching assistant for torts, and of course I said yes. In offering me that job, Catharine helped me bring in extra spending money that I desperately needed. She also knew, and I soon realized, that working with her gave me an opportunity to get the inside scoop on how professors graded student work, and therefore how I could be more successful in law school. In my second year of law school, I had the wonderful fortune of taking a seminar on feminist legal theory with Catharine. She ran the seminar as though it was its own consciousness raising session. She encouraged us to sit quietly and go deeper in thought when we confronted hard questions about women's rights and place in the world. I clearly remember when the small group discussed the legal treatment of pregnant women. Catharine said the law thought of pregnant women as having a disability, but she thought otherwise. She said, pregnancy really is a special ability. Such was her feminism and advocacy for women. Catharine was also a philosopher and had been won over by pragmatism early in her life. I too had studied philosophy and considered it my first love. We were nerds like that. Imagine my excitement when Catharine told me of her work to create a joint JD PhD in philosophy program for students. Though I realized I couldn't follow that path due to the time and financial commitment, Catharine still encouraged me to branch out from law school and pursue graduate philosophy courses at BC, which I did during 3L. It was such a breath of fresh air to study her Habermas, Rawls, and the ideals of a just democracy, and to share those ideas in debates with Catharine. She was so smart, kind-hearted, patient, and a great friend. Thank you for inviting me to share some memories of my friendship with Catharine. It is an honor to celebrate her life. This will be Rebecca Guo, class of 2024.
I'm Rebecca. I am class of 2024, and in a lot of ways, a very lucky and unfortunate class. We were Professor Wells's last semester of torts. We actually had her in this classroom right here. So, in terms of Professor Wells as an advocate, I had to kind of think about this one for a second, because my first reaction was to think of, like someone screaming on the steps of the Capitol to a crowd, rallying them to a cause. And yeah, I could have gone onto the internet and looked for such instances of Professor Wells doing such things, I'm sure, but so could all of you. So not super useful in that sense. So instead, I think I had to really investigate what advocacy meant to me. As an Asian American, second generation girl growing up in the Midwest, Ohio, I was really raised to kind of keep my head down and shut up and not say anything that could really stir the boat culturally by my parents. They just escaped a country that still doesn't admit Tiananmen Square happened. So I was not very obedient to their directive. And so being in Ohio, I think I was a minority that learned very quickly the difference between people that would advocate on the surface publicly and people who actually genuinely believed and lived that advocacy. I don't know how many of you know, but Ohio is one of those states that turned red in the last election. There were a lot of such people growing up around me. What was notable about Professor Wells, though, was the fact that in many, many ways, she did actually believe everything that she stood for. And this was evident to me in so many ways. I wish I could share a cute little story about sometime she demonstrated that in class, but I don't have access to those kind of recordings anymore. So instead, I think I will explain the way that Professor Wells really demonstrated this to me in the most memorable way, which is that I had the privilege of working with her on her torts textbook. She has made that textbook available for free online. As many of you who have been in higher education have experienced, the cost of textbooks is exorbitant. And as an advocate, Professor Wells is somebody who genuinely took the time to listen to and understand those people that she wanted to help. And in this very small and maybe not extremely socially, culturally significant way, she understood that us, her audience, her law students, were really not people that could afford to drop $300, $400 on a textbook every single semester. And this small action of making her textbook free when she didn't have to is something that I think resonated with me in terms of how genuinely she was very much an advocate in every single aspect of her life. Yeah. Next we have Don Ferrero. As a complainant.
My name is John Ferraro, class of 2022 or 2022. I was a student in Professor Wells's torts class in the spring of 2020. That was the first semester that was impacted by COVID-19 and marked by the transition to remote learning. On our last day of class, around this time, about 3 years ago now, Professor Wells shared her remarks with us about the circumstances in which we found ourselves and how we could look forward to the future. These were the remarks that she made, which have been a really great source of comfort and inspiration for myself, and I know for a lot of my classmates as well. So I do have a few things I want to say to you. First of all, I want you to know how difficult this semester, or I know how difficult this semester has been for many of you. And I've admired the fact that you've come to class, you've done the reading, and you've taken it very seriously under difficult circumstances. And I want to say to you that that takes character, and that takes real commitment to your own professional excellence, and I applaud you for that. It's also been hard for me. I don't think I have ever understood how much it means to me to be in the presence of students and feel that wonderful energy that comes from all of you. I miss the person-to-person interactions a lot, and I do hope that when things are back to normal, you will stop by my office and say hello. So that's one thing I wanted to say to you. I also wanted to say to you, I think I understand what this has been like for you. I belong to a generation that was equally uncertain as the uncertainty you're facing now. We were worried about nuclear bombs. We lived in a country that was torn apart over an inexplicable war. Police were shooting at students on campuses. We were demoralized by racial injustices, confused by rapidly changing gender roles and sexual attitudes. Jobs were very few, and meaningful jobs were almost non-existent. So I think I can empathize with you fairly well. So I want to say to you now what I never ever would have believed then. The uncertainty that you feel is a great gift. It will enable you to engage life on your own terms and to find genuine happiness. You are bright, hardworking, and well-educated. There is always a place for all of you in this world. For each of you, there is a future out there. You have a great deal to give, so seize the future and don't be afraid. The world is changing really rapidly, but our problems are the seeds of transformation. You are its embodiment and its soul. So trust yourselves and the universe to forge a new world, one that's more sustainable, one that's more just, and a place of satisfaction and meaning for yourselves. I think what I'm saying, it may seem to you at this time and place in your life that nothing's going to work, that things are going to fall apart. But in crisis, there's opportunity, and it will allow you to move forward and build the kind of world that you want to build. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and thanks so much to all of you for joining. This has been just a wonderful afternoon. I also do want to acknowledge and recognize someone who did not put herself on the speaking program, but in some ways, Ingrid Hillinger, I understand that this event is a testament to your friendship and your colleagueship of Catherine. And so thank you for bringing us all together with this. So, thanks again to all of you. Please join us for a reception in Barrett House in honor of Catherine.